Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Sailing the East podcast. I'm Bela and Mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the east coast of the United States. In some episodes, we will focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show.
Now, Bela, what makes this podcast unusual is that only one of us sails.
Yeah, that does make it unusual and interesting, I hope. I'm the sailor, and I've been sailing for over 30 years. Not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the east coast of the United States.
And Bela, I am not a sailor. I know very little about sailing, but I'm curious, so I'm going to ask most of the questions, and you're going to try to answer. Now, Bela, we've had some beautiful weather here the last few days in Minster. Blue sky, warm temperatures, nice light breezes, and I was thinking about you. Did you make it to the boat this past week?
I did, and we've had some gorgeous weather here as well. Although as I look out the window while we're recording this on April 1st, it's actually snowing outside lightly. Oof. We're not supposed to get any accumulation, but it has gotten a little cooler. But yes, indeed, I did get to the boat, and I got her uncovered.
Now, Bela, we talked a little bit in an earlier episode about getting the boat ready for the winter, and this was an involved process. I was pretty impressed at how much work it was. What's the relaunching process like?
Well, I think it's going to be as much work as getting her put away for the winter. So if you recall, the boat is out of the water, and as they say, on the hard, which means that it's sitting in a large parking lot of other boats. And the boats are kind of put up on these stands that hold them off the ground. And I have a large canvas winter cover for the boat that the previous owner had custom made for the boat. So step number one is sort of taking that cover off. Well, actually, I should go back one step. Step zero is getting my step ladder out and climbing up the ladder to get on the boat. And to open the companionway. The companionway is sort of the door to the insides of the boat down below, and looking around. Because there's always the possibility that some critters decide to make the boat their home for the winter. And when we had our smaller boat, our Catalina 22, that I had a trailer for and I kept in the backyard. We used to have a big chunk of land in one of our previous homes. And I used to keep it in the back. And it seemed like almost every winter, either some chipmunks or mice would take up residence in our boat and chew something up.
Ooh, Bela, that's one thing. We don't really have squirrels or chipmunks here, which is interesting. And when people see a squirrel here, they go nuts. They're like, oh, look at the little squirrel. And I've had the same experience with you when I lived in upstate New York varmints and rodents and, to be highly discouraged, right, from right. My property and belongings. So I totally get this. And yeah, if you ever wind up moving here, you can put your sailboat and know that there's not so many squirrels and chipmunks. But, okay, so what was the result? Do you have any varmints this time?
Well, so I got down below, looked around, and there wasn't any. So that was great. And I think that since the boat's on a large parking lot, it's not really on the edge of the woods. There's a lot of other potential homes for these critters to go into. We did not have any. So that was good. That was good news. However, there's always something. So in the cockpit of the boat, which is under the cover, so there's a cover around it, but it's not a tight-fitting cover. In the cockpit, there's a folding table that kind of folds down when you're sailing, but if you're at anchor, you can fold it up, and it's a nice place to eat, have some drinks or whatever. I have a canvas cover for that keeps it out of the sun, and for the winter, I kept that canvas cover on it. Well, it looked like, I think it was a bird. Decided that they could fly in, the openings of the cover, and for whatever reason, peck away. It could fly in under the boat cover and get into the cockpit, and for whatever reason, decided to peck away at my table cover because I think, it's made out of canvas, and they probably figured it was a nice, soft nesting material. So I have a couple of holes in my cover that need to get patched. So that was the only real thing I found.
Can you take that like to the sail maker? Like, are there boat people that fix this kind of stuff, and is it very expensive to repair this type of canvas damage?
Yes, and yes is the answer to that question. Canvas is a big business in the marine world because you have boat covers, you have things that are biminis, which basically keep you out of the sun. So there's a lot of canvas on a boat. And most marinas have a canvas repair shop right there at the marina, or I should say the bigger marinas do. And yes, it's expensive because it's custom work. It's like getting a custom suit made. They got to come measure things and et cetera. So I took the cover home with me, actually, back up to upstate New York. And we have a bunch of canvas shops around here. And I actually already dropped it off. And the guy said, yeah, I can patch this up. And it'll cost me $100 or so to get it done.
Yeah.
But it's labor intensive.
We'll take a few weeks, you think, and get it back, or you have to wait all season?
Oh, no. He said a couple of days because it's a small job.
Cool. Interesting. Now, speaking of the cover for the boat itself must be really large, right? Because it's like a 45-foot boat. Do you get that thing off by yourself, or do you need help? How does that work?
Yeah, so getting the boat uncovered is one of the few things that I actually really need a hand with, both covering it and uncovering it. I could probably struggle through it myself, but it would take 3 times longer. But fortunately, my son, Andy, lives close to the marina, and he came over to give me a hand getting the boat uncovered. So the cover is actually in 3 pieces. There's a forward piece, a middle piece, and a piece in the stern. So it basically zips together. The 3 pieces zip together, and it drapes itself over the boom. So that's sort of what holds it up in the back. And then it attaches to a halyard. A halyard is a rope that goes to the top of the mast, so I can hold up part of the cover again. So it sheds the water in the snow. But we got it untied, folded, and actually loaded into car in about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. So that actually went better than I expected. That went quite well.
Okay, that's way faster than what I would have imagined. So that's cool. So you've got that down to a process. Now, I remember also you were talking about the boat's name when you got the boat. And, sometimes you change the name of the boat, but when the boat changes ownership, a lot of times the boat name changes. And I remember you were kind of trying to decide what to do. What did you decide about the name of the boat, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, so we did change the name of the boat, and we actually picked the name back when we bought the boat, because when the boat changes hands, or title, I'll call it, the boat is actually registered with the United States Coast Guard. So in the U.S., you can register your boat with the state, or if the boat meets certain criteria, you can actually register it with the U.S. Coast Guard. And when you register it with the U.S. Coast Guard, they want to know the name of the boat because the name has to be displayed on the boat prominently. So at that time, we decided to change the name of the boat. The original name of the boat was Magic's Ride. And it turns out the previous owner, the person I bought the boat from, was a helicopter pilot in the U.S. Marines. And I think as most pilots in the military, they end up with a code name or a nickname. And his nickname was Magic. So he named his boat Magic's Ride. And we decided to name the boat Paradox. It has multiple meanings, and I'll let you see if you can figure one of them out. But, paradox is sort of a good word, and so we named it Paradox. And so you can buy vinyl lettering, self-adhesive vinyl lettering from places that make that stuff, design your font. And the hardest part of changing the name was actually peeling the old name off because it had been on there for like 9 years. And that took us quite a while. And there's plenty of YouTube videos to show you how to apply these vinyl lettering. And that went quite smooth. So there's a name, the name Paradox is on the stern of the boat, on the port side and the starboard side. So that's right and left sides near the back. It says Paradox. And then across the stern of the boat, actually, the other thing that you have to have for a Coast Guard registered boat is the port of call, meaning where does the boat typically sit? Although that's, I've seen people with boat names or boat port of calls that are, like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So it clearly doesn't need to be next to water, but there's some meaning to that. I'm not sure what it is, but for us, it's Barrington, Rhode Island. So we put that name across the back. So, so that went fairly well. It took us probably a good 2.5 hours to do that. That took longer than I expected. But the part that took a long time was getting the old name off because it was pretty stubborn and it had to use some solvents and scrape away. But hopefully we don't do that again.
It's like a bumper sticker, right, on a car.
It's exactly like a bumper sticker. Yes.
Now, is there also a number, like a license plate number? Like sometimes I see numbers on boats. Is that part of this deal too, or is that separate?
So there is a number, and for pleasure craft, that number needs to be displayed. I could put it on the outside of the boat, but for pleasure craft, it needs to be permanently attached somewhere on the boat. So there's actually one of those, you see them oftentimes in front of people's houses, but it's a piece of wood that was carved out with this number. Mm-hmm. It's 1.5 feet long and 3 inches tall, and that is actually permanently glued to the hull of the boat because that's what the Coast Guard requirement is. So yes, there is an official registration number, and that number does not change. So once you register the boat, that same number gets transferred from owner to owner to owner to owner.
Okay, so you can change the name, but not the number.
That's correct.
Got it. So, and if you decide to change the name again, this is like a person. Like I've got friends and sometimes their kids aren't well behaved. So I would threaten them, look, I've got the paperwork to change your name to something completely ridiculous, right? And your parents have agreed to sign it. I'll pay the $140 and I'm going to take it to the court. If you don't, eat your dinner and be quiet, right? And that works. Anybody can borrow that if they want. It's a very effective tool. You just have to be willing to follow through. And of course, those kids knew that I would be happy to go to the court and have their name changed to, ridiculous the third, right, or something like that. And that was it was a credible threat. But so it's the same thing. If you want to change the name again, you just go to the Coast Guard, file the paperwork, pay a little bit of money, and then just get a new sticker.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Changing the name is pretty easy. Just costs you a little bit of money. Yep.
Interesting. So all right, on the technical side, what were your initial challenges?
Yeah. So let's see. What other things did we do? So the batteries. So the boat has several batteries on the boat. So we charged the batteries. We kept the batteries on the boat. And I kept them disconnected. So some people talk you should take the batteries off the boat. You should leave the batteries on the boat. Sometimes you should disconnect them. So there's all those various conflicting suggestions or help that you can get on YouTube or forums. And I decided to keep the batteries on the boat. I disconnected the batteries completely from everything on the boat. And I brought out some extension cords with me when we went to the boat. To get it uncovered, and a couple of battery chargers, and I plugged those battery chargers in, and I kind of gave the batteries all a good charge because they've been sitting now, since October, not having any charge put on them or anything.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, okay, you deal with the batteries. What's the next task?
Oh, one other quick thing about the batteries. So, it's a big boat, so it actually has 3 separate batteries on it. There's a starter battery, which is sort of a slightly larger version than your car battery, which is used for starting the engine and the generator motors. Looks just like a car battery. And then there's 2 other large batteries that are called the house batteries. And this is for powering everything else. So like the lights, the radio, the GPS. And these batteries, I can imagine if you're going on a 4 or 5 day cruise, these batteries are going to power everything for 4 or 5 days for you. So they're rather large. They weigh about 100 pounds each. So they're not easily removed from the boat. That was another reason for keeping them on the boat because I'm not even sure how I'd get them off. There's another thing I would need help, at least one other person for. And they're about $500 a pop. So you want to take good care of them. And I just want to say a few other things about those batteries. So I put the chargers on those. They all look like they survived the winter okay, and they should be good.
Okay. Cool. So you got the battery squared away. What's next?
Yeah. So then there's I changed the boat zincs.
The what?
Yes, we have zincs on a boat. So did you take chemistry in high school, Mike?
I did, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah,
Bela.
well, I remember doing the experiment where you take two dissimilar metals and you put them in salt water or some ionic solution, and you fundamentally have a battery, because the electrons from one move easily to the other one, and so you have this problem on a boat, and our boat's made out of fiberglass, so the hull's not a problem, but the propeller shaft is stainless steel. And the propeller is made out of bronze. And I think bronze, if I remember correctly, is a combination of brass and a few other things. So when those two things are bolted together in salt water, the bronze tends to dissolve and deposit itself onto the stainless steel. So what people have figured out is that you put a sacrificial piece in there that's even more active, I'll call it, dissolves even faster than the bronze. So those are typically made out of zinc or aluminum. And so you have to change those every year, because sacrificial, they sort of go away. So I had to take the old ones off and I had to bolt these zincs onto the propeller shaft. And so that the zinc corrodes and not my propeller.
I never thought about this before, but it all makes sense. And I mean, I know just from being a homeowner, which I'm not anymore, and I'm thankful, but I remember the sacrificial rod that goes into the water heater, right? Same kind of idea.
Same exact idea.
So,
Yep.
So this totally makes sense. And, vague memories of chemistry in 1985, which I'm sure is before most of the listeners were born. But it all makes sense. Now, what about the hull of the boat? Okay, I remember you telling me that minimizing resistance and drag were important, and I totally get that. But is there any prep work related to this aspect of sailing?
Yeah, so there's a few other things I have to do on my next trip, because doing the batteries, the zincs, uncovering the boat, changing the name was about all I got done on this trip. So for the next trip, I need to wax the hull. And the part that gets waxed is the part above the water line. So I have a buffer. I'll go around and I'll wax that. And then there's the bottom of the boat will actually get painted. I'm having the yard do that, because they put some nasty chemicals into the paint on the bottom so barnacles and seaweed doesn't grow on it. So that needs to be sanded. And I think it's just one of those things that I'm happy to have them sand it, do all the dust containment and all of those things that they need to do, and then have them paint the hull. So they're going to do that. Again, hull underneath the water. And then there are these things called through hulls in a boat, which are basically holes in the hull of your boat. And they have a valve on them, but it brings in water to cool the engine, for example. It brings in water for the air conditioner to work. So there's a handful of these. There's some instruments that go through that tells you how deep the water is. There's another one for the speed. And you just got to make sure that all of those are closed, because when you take the boat out for the winter, I often open a lot of those things to drain the engine water out, etc. So I got to make sure those are closed, because when they put the boat back in the water, you don't want those to be open, because yes, indeed, the boat will sink.
And I think I've seen these. These are small holes, right? They're not big, giant, gaping things, right?
Yeah, they're, an inch to 2 to maybe 3 inches in diameter, with a valve, with a ball valve, a quarter turn ball valve on the inside of it, and typically attached to a hose that goes someplace. But yeah,
I've seen these a few times, and I've seen boats out of the water, right, when they're on
Sure.
the lift, the crane, or if they're sitting on the blocks or whatever. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, what else?
Yeah. And then I think the last thing I need to do before she pops into the water, because there's some things you got to do before it goes into the water, right? Other things I can do once it's in the water. I want to install a prop shaft rope cutter.
A what?
A prop shaft rope cutter.
Okay, what's a prop shaft rope cutter? That sounds a little bizarre.
So, when you're sailing around, particularly in New England and in many places along the coast of United States, the East Coast in particular, the Chesapeake Bay, there's lots and lots of crab pots and lobster pots around. And, they all have a buoy tied to them. So the fisherman knows where they are located. And they usually grab that buoy, and that's how they pull the pot up to check to see if there's any crabs or lobsters in it. Well, lots of times you encounter them while you're out sailing. And sometimes they're not very visible, particularly if it's dark. If it's dark, you can't see them at all. Or if it's wavy, sometimes you won't see them until you're right on top of them. So one of the things you don't want to happen is you don't want that rope or line to get tangled around your propeller. Because if it does, it's not going to untangle itself, number one. And number two, if your motor is running, you'd be surprised how strong even a 3/8 piece of nylon line is. It'll stop your motor, and it can cause all sorts of damage. And if you might find yourself in a situation where all of a sudden now you can't maneuver, you can't steer the boat, you can't do anything, right? So it's a bad situation to be in. So they make these little gizmos that you can attach to the prop shaft, the shaft that turns the propeller. You attach it right in front of the propeller, and it's got like a serrated edge on it. There's various different designs, and you attach it there, and that way, if a rope gets wrapped around it, the theory is it kind of cuts the rope. And so your engine can keep working, and you can keep having steerage and propulsion and all those types of things. So I got to put one of those on. I ordered one, and the boat didn't have one. But to me, it's sort of like an insurance policy, right? Yeah, they're expensive. It's going to cost me several $100 for one of these because they're made out of stainless steel, because they can't corrode, and they have sharp edges on them, etc. But to me, it's like an insurance policy, because sooner or later, I'm going to run over a crab pot or a lobster pot, and I'm going to get a rope tangled around the propeller. So that's the last thing I got to do.
That makes sense. One of my few sailing trips, Bela, I was up in Maine, and it was wavy, and we came up on the wave, and then we came down kind of right on top of a lobster rope, and it got caught in the propeller, and it didn't have one of these devices, and it was a big hassle. So I could see how dropping a couple $100, especially if you're going to be sailing up where there's crabs and lobsters, that this makes a ton of sense. Interesting. Well, that's a lot of work, Bela. I mean, I'm tired just thinking about it, but it's a labor of love, isn't it?
It is. It's a hobby. It's like many things we do for our enjoyment and pleasure. You got to be into it, and you got to get satisfaction from it, and it brings me a lot of satisfaction. So I enjoy doing it.
Nice. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap this episode up. So just kind of to summarize, we talked about the process of getting the boat back in the water, everything from going and getting the covers off and checking for animals and making repairs, to taking care of the zincs and and taking care of the hull, deciding what you're going to do yourself versus what you're going to have a shop do, and even learned about prop shaft rope cutters. That was a new one for me, Bela. So this was great. So listeners, thanks. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and found our conversation interesting and thought-provoking. As always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you enjoy the podcast, please let us know. We love hearing from our listeners. Or better yet, tell a friend. Or, if you want, write a review in iTunes or on your favorite podcasting application. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
That's great, Bela. I can't wait for our next adventure. From over here in Münster, Germany, auf Wiedersehen.